Good afternoon, everyone. This is Alan Murabayashi speaking to you from PhotoShelter, Honolulu office, where I am visiting my parents. And today we have a guest who's also coming from different parts of the interwebs. Ami Vitale is joining us from Missoula, Montana, Big Sky Country. Before we get started, though, I want to let you know that to the right of your screen, you will see a go-to webinar control panel. And from that panel, you can ask us questions as we move along, and we'll try to do our best to sort of integrate them into the conversation. But let me tell you a little bit about Amy and how I know her. This was around, and not to date us, but we around the turn of the millennium, when I used to visit the MSNBC website. Every week in the Photos of the Week feature were all these amazing photos coming out of India, and I was like, "Who is this Ami Vitale?" I didn't even know how to pronounce her name. And then everyone's like, "Oh my God, it's Ami Vitale!" Da, 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 da. And I mean, she was such a great photographer, and still is a great photographer, and just blew up, and had one of these early photo portfolio websites that everyone was like, "Oh my God!" I mean, you're kind of a trailblazer of the internet and photography, Amy. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Alan. It's yeah, and thanks for joining us from Hawaii. That's pretty wonderful. No, it's great to be here, and I have to say this is the first time I've done this, so um, yeah, just I think questions, people out there, please ask questions because it makes this so much more engaging for everybody.
Super.
But
Let's jump into
yeah,
this, and
yeah.
why don't you kind of take us through your resume here?
Oh, let's skip this and just jump to the good stuff.
Well,
So,
I should point
so
out
I'll just
that you've worked for major publications, including National
yeah,
Geographic, which is the cream of the crop in terms of
yeah,
photography, and have won a
yeah.
ton of awards, and have also served as a judge. So as we talk about photography contests, people can know that you've been on both sides of the fence.
Right. And and I do want to say, I mean, I guess we can just start this conversation about the question of contests. Do you enter them? That's a big one. And my personal feeling is, I do think that they're useful, and I rarely enter contests now because I feel like I'm where I need to be. They serve the purpose when I started entering them. I was very thoughtful about which ones I entered and why I was entering them, and it was actually a struggle because I think that sometimes you're working on bodies of work, and it's this whole ego thing. Are you entering, is this sort of a path to fame? And I feel like if that's why you're entering, you probably shouldn't be. I mean, our ego is a part of us, and but I think you have to keep it in control and sort of figure out why why you're doing this, and being really honest with yourself, like, do I have a body of work, and is it valuable? And frankly, contests do get your work out there. And I have an example where I had a photo story that one of my first photo essays was in Guinea-Bissau, and I had taken all these images and asked a lot of editors if they were interested in running it, and nobody was. And then after I entered and won a few contests, the floodgates opened, and everybody wanted to publish that story, and it sort of was a path for me to continue doing the work I care about. But
Now, you are a photojournalist and documentary photographer. What
mhm.
sort of contests did you enter when you were initially doing this type of activity?
Right. Well, I think the big ones, the important ones, and it's certainly gotten a lot more expanded since I started, but it's still pretty reliable. World Press Photo is one of the main ones, and last year I had the chance to be on the other side and judge it, and there were over 100,000 images, and um, but but that is an important one, certainly, that people look at. There's the POYi International, that's a US based one. There's the NPPA National Press Photographers Association. That was another one I entered. But now today there's a lot more, and we'll get into that. There's, China has a great big international photo contest, which is, I mean, what's so interesting now is that I'm sure a lot of people are online from all parts of the world. And what is so beautiful about this sort of democracy of what's happening with the web is that um, it's a double-edged sword. Everybody's a photographer, but on the other hand, we're getting great photographers that never had the opportunity to enter these contests before. Um, and yeah,
You know,
it's really
and in
kind of
that
changing the
vein,
field.
you are a working professional photographer. There are a lot of contests that are aimed towards non-professionals. Do you think there's still value in that if I'm, a hobbyist or a serious amateur?
Absolutely. And I think, that's something I wanted to get into a little more deeply and ask these questions. You really need to be very honest with yourself, your skill level, where you're at, your motivations. All of these things are really important. And, if you're just starting out and you just want to gauge where you are, how do you compare to other people? I mean, that's very valid. Um, and I think it's fine to enter those contests, but be honest because at World Press, it's a professional contest, and I did see entries that I was pretty sure they weren't professional photographers. I
Hmm.
mean, it was just so evident their skill level was not, it really was at the amateur level.
Right.
And and so I think it's important to gauge where you're at and that's going to help you. And then as you get more success and you can learn more about it, that level of commitment as a photographer, you it's important. You when you're entering these professional contests, you're wasting your time and our time, and really it's just a waste of energy if you're just not there and you're sort of the lazy sort of I see a lot of lazy entries.
Right.
Um, and I will get into, I also want to at some point talk about the biggest mistakes I see and that sort of thing.
And important to
But
point out, I guess, that depending on the contest, some of them have entry fees, so it can actually be pretty expensive to apply to multiple contests with multiple images throughout the course of the year. So you almost have to budget for it in a lot of cases.
that's right. That's not a bad idea to budget for it because some of them are worthwhile. I mean, I, I can't give a tangible, I mean, the goal is really at the end of this is that you want your work out there and seen. And the more places it's seen, it's sort of registering and into the editor's minds and people that will publish it and sort of bring you more success so that you can continue your work. So there are contests, and the one point I wanted to make was you really should read those rules. I mean, some of these contests are complete money grabs and
Right.
or copyright grabs. Um, so read through what they're asking for. Read through the rules. Very often, and don't get afraid if they ask for, for example, the Nikon International Contest, they need to publish these and it's a commercial entity. So they're going to ask for, there's going to be some legalese in there, but that shouldn't scare you. There's no entry fee and it's a big money reward after. And frankly, there are those contests that you should enter.
Yeah. Yep.
So
So here's a list of some contests, World Press Photo that you mentioned, and almost everyone knows about the PDN contests that they run during the course of the year.
mhm.
And you also wanted to talk a little bit about grants, which I guess are a form of a contest in terms of there's a monetary prize associated with them, and there's actually some pretty prestigious foundations that are giving out grants to various levels of photography and various types of photography.
Yeah, and so I think, again, this actually goes back to the question, why are you entering these contests? And I think for a lot of us, especially, if you're working on a big project that takes often years, You really care about the impact it's going to have. Are you making meaningful change? I mean, are you advancing the issue? These are really important parts. And so it's not really just about the contest and getting this award. You really there's all of these grants which will help you to further your project and keep working on it, and maybe put you in touch with the people that are going to publish it and help you in ways you can't even imagine. So even more than those big contests, I think these grants for, we're not talking about the amateur photographer right now. We're talking about people with bodies of work that
Hmm.
are at a certain level, and I think that it's really important to look at the grant possibilities. It can change your life. Um, yeah.
The
So.
we wrote a blog post, and we have a little bit.ly down there, bit.ly/contest worth, to talk about different criteria for entering a contest, and some of the things that we wanted people to consider were, what sort of exposure would you get, i.e., is there like a magazine behind it or a well-trafficked website? Is there a monetary prize? Is there camera gear prize, etc.? So I think, as you alluded to, there are a number of different factors that you have to sort of consider before you kind of just jump in and start applying to contests.
Mhm, mhm. And the other thing, I mean, one of the biggest benefits of entering contests, I think it's just a way each year for me to look at, if you're entering, for a photographer, to look at your work and really ask yourself the question, is my work good enough? Where am I? It's a chance to reflect on what you've done over the past year and look honestly at, where are the holes? What do I need to do to make this better? Am I getting in that rut? I mean, we all get into ruts. And do I need to be photographing different kinds of things? Should I, am I shooting too many sports, or should I be, it's just a chance. It's not really about even winning. I think that this is very much what should drive you is just to be better and to figure out and to be honest with yourself and figure out what you need to do to get there.
We kind of had the awards season for photography, and there's always kind of the deadline's coming up. Are you ready? How much time have you historically spent sort of prepping for your contest entries? Is this something that begins months before the deadline?
Yeah, one thing I used to do, as I said, I don't really enter very often anymore, but what I would do is during the year, I had a folder on my desktop. And if I felt like I had a strong image, I would just drop it in there because it is so hard to go back over the years, a year of work, and you miss things. And so I would regularly every week, every day, if I had a great image that day, I would put it in that folder.
Hmm.
And then at the end of the year, I would go through and look at everything and see how it works together. And we're going to talk a little bit about the actual editing process a little bit a little bit later in this
Yeah.
conversation. But there's definitely, I don't think the problem is I think a lot of people leave it to the last minute, and and we're also not very good editors of our own work. You should be. We're terrible
Yeah,
editors.
yeah.
And so getting feedback from people throughout the year is very useful.
Let's walk through some of your do's and don'ts for entering contests
Hmm.
here.
Hmm. Hmm.
We talked a little bit about the motivation behind entering the contest.
Hmm. Yes. So that's really, I mean, that's one of the most important things to me. Really, really be honest with yourself, and again, keep your ego in check. This is not a path to fame. If you think it is, you probably shouldn't be entering.
Hmm.
Are you really ready for them? Where is your skill level, both in, um, the aesthetics and your knowledge of the story, and one big thing, are you entering to please the judges? Because that is the worst thing you can do. Do
Hmm.
not be thinking about what the judges want. I mean, we will sense your sincerity and authenticity. if you're trying to do something and sort of reading up on the judges and reading up on the, on I mentioned go over past winners, but it's not to sort of see what you should be like trying to mimic what's won in the past or try to gauge what a particular judge will like. I think you're going to get really um, lost,
Hmm.
and you're going to lose the impact of your work. You need to stay true to yourself because we sense it right away. And the other big thing I noticed, which is kind of hilarious, is every year in these contests, we will see literally no less than 50 images that are exactly the same of a particular image that may have won a year before. And that is exactly what you don't want to be doing. I
Right.
mean, we're looking for originality, surprise us, show us something we've never seen, show us your commitment to a story and how deep you've gone. Um, and and okay, so maybe a wrestling story has won, for example.
Right.
And say you're already working on a wrestling story, that's fine, but just make it different. Because it's actually shocking to see that that's what people think um, is going to win.
Um,
So,
I guess also with the judging panels, there is quite a bit of change in any one year for who they ask to judge a contest like World Press Photo. And so there's really no
right.
benefit in trying to like guess the judging aesthetic because it's never going to be the same set of people year after year after year.
That's right. And what was so fascinating to me is, I mean, I learned so much from the other judges who come from, I just judged a contest and there were judges from South Africa and China and, in India and Russia. I mean, all over. And we did not agree on anything
Wow.
ever. And there is no right, and it's really sort of the aesthetic and mood of the judges. It's also what picture came up right next to yours.
Yeah.
That impacts how we see yours. If there's a similar story to yours right next to yours, we are comparing them side by side, and one of yours is going to go, if not both of them. um, so it's, yeah, go ahead.
You had
What were you going to
mentioned
ask?
a little bit earlier in regards to the terms and conditions of the contest and saying, for example, the Nikon contest would require you to allow them to publish the photo of contest winners,
Mhm.
maybe in a book or online, etc. What sort of terms do you think are fair to the photographer in terms of scope of how they use that image?
Well, I mean, exactly that. I mean, they have to do a bit of advertising for these contests, and frankly, it's just more recognition for your photo. So I really don't mind when they, you know, ask for those rights to publish. Um, I get nervous when I see those, that it's sort of a front for something else, like maybe they're making a calendar. I don't know.
Hmm.
I mean, and or they're just asking for the copyright right out. And um, there don't. I just think there's probably a lot of contests out there that are just pure exploitation,
Yeah.
and and so you need to do your homework. You need to figure out if this is really, get look at look at past winners for that reason. I mean, are these people you admire and who are reputable in the field? And
Right.
if they're entering, then it's a pretty good um, estimate that you'll be fine.
On a technical note, calibrate your screen. You're a big proponent of color accuracy, and why don't you
Yes,
talk to us about that?
this is one of my biggest, and not just mine. I've seen so many judges where we will automatically disqualify images that have been over manipulated, and it's just poor. It could just be that your screens aren't calibrated and you didn't know and you're oversaturated your images. But most of the time, I get the sense that it's not. I mean, you can see people have worked in Photoshop meticulously, and it is really a big problem for me and for many judges because it's I mean, the art is in the camera. I don't. unless it's sort of one of these conceptual art categories where it
Right.
says it's completely allowed and it's clear that you're, maybe moving things around and creating these concepts, that's fine. But for the great majority of what we do and what these contests are about, it just looks like a bad photographer who's trying to fix things later. And and then it's just, it's just garish too. And it just doesn't, like you said, you had that great blog a while back after World Press Photo, why do these pictures look like a movie poster? And I totally agree with you. I know this is gonna, there's a lot of debate and very controversial, but my best advice to you all is just don't do it. We can see the content. If your picture is is full of content and is good, you don't need to do all of that.
Mhm.
We're going to base it on the subject. And all those pretty colors and perfect sort of movie poster glossy look really takes away from me from, the authenticity. I start to distrust, and ethics is huge for me. I that's another thing I want to talk about, which is not just in Photoshop, which is a big ethical question when
Mhm.
you're starting to manipulate things. So I start wondering, like, what's your line? What else are you going to manipulate? Did you
Right.
manipulate the subject? Is this true? So it just makes me nervous. And, with these big contests, we really want to know, we don't want to get in trouble later that this photographer's been unethical in any capacity. And there's all these other questions where um, just manipulation in the field and then how far did you go to get that shot? I literally from World Press Photo would go home and have nightmares at night from some of the images. I'm not
Right.
kidding. They were just so horrific and sensationalistic, and I just got the feeling the photographer's like, what else can I do to shock them?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and taste is important. I mean, we want to see your vision and and not just be shocked.
So we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about the judging process and even manipulation,
Okay.
but why don't we go through kind of an example of how you worked on a series of images here?
Okay. Well, this was a long-term project that I spent about 4 years working in this region, Kashmir, and I might just throw out there amazing Kashmiri photographers as well. So I committed to the story, and I had this huge body of work, and I would enter these contests, and so I just want to go through and say I put together a sort of a slideshow of a wider edit, and then I want to kind of get into this, like how do you choose what images to use? This, especially for storytelling, the images need to each each image should be amazing on its own, but it also needs to work together with the other images to reveal something new. And so the biggest mistake I see in photo essays is that people don't know how to edit, and they often will be in love with two images, for example, that are similar. And you just can't do that. You really just have to be tough and get some friends and just cut one of them out because repetition is a bad thing. And then also putting a weak image in there just to try to show another piece of the story. If it's weak, just don't put it in there
Hmm.
because even if you have the most amazing essay, somebody else is also going to have a pretty incredible essay. And if they have no weak images, they're going to win. And you don't have to have the exact number that they say, like say it's a 12 image essay. You can have 10 images in there. And if they're all solid images, it's going to be a much better photo essay than somebody that's put a photo essay of 12 images with two weak images.
I totally agree. In the limited judging that I've done and seen series, when there's a bad image, it's almost jarring. It's visually jarring, and you're like, oh my gosh, is this guy an amateur or a pro?
Exactly.
Right?
It just takes away all your Credibility. I just think, oh, they're not where they need to be.
Yeah.
So
Can you
that's
step
right.
back a
That's
moment and talk about, and talking about like motivation for shooting a story, etc. How did you get to this part of the world in the first place, and then decide you wanted to spend 4 years before entering the contests?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think that the stories find me, and I moved to India and I visited Kashmir once, and it just captured my heart. And I also felt like at that time, the only kinds of stories I saw coming out of Kashmir were um, very sort of just all about the violence. It didn't talk about the culture. This beautiful culture which was being lost to the conflict, and I saw a real need. I didn't see Kashmir in the international media, and I thought, hmm, this is a place where there aren't a bazillion photographers, which is another thing about contests. You see these hot spots, and so you're really competing with the best of the best. You go to these hot spots. And so my best advice is find a story that is unique to you, that nobody else is doing, that you can have great access, and it's original. So that's that's how it just kind of captured my heart. And then each year I would apply for a grant, and much to my joy and horror, I would get it and I would just stay on for another year. So so yeah, that's why I was there. And I also felt like I needed to really, it takes time to tell these complex stories. You cannot parachute in and leave and expect to get something with depth. You really have to commit to whatever you're doing. And that's another thing I tell people is shoot what's in your backyard. I'm doing a story on Montana right now because this is where I live, and I want to I have better access, and you know it better, and you're that knowledge comes through. I mean,
Yeah.
as I said before, I can tell, I can see immediately when there's a committed, smart photographer.
So you've spent 4 years shooting in Kashmir. You have, I presume, thousands of images, and now you decide it's time to enter a photo contest. So what are
Right.
the
Well, this is
steps
sort
here?
of, yeah, and these are, this might have been year one of my images. I just threw some images
Hmm.
in here. So the steps are to sort of, as I said, like throughout the year, put images that move you in a folder, and then put them all up in a PhotoShelter lightbox. Or print them out, and put them side to side and see how they work together. And Alan, can you just scroll through to the next
Yeah.
slide, and actually maybe even to the third slide after this?
Okay.
Yeah, okay, and then maybe even go to the next slide after this. Okay, so here's a selection of images that I had an attachment to. I like them all for different reasons. But the problem is, really, you should only be entering, oh, go back to go back one.
Okay.
You should really only be entering one of these images. They're just too similar. They're not saying anything different. Um, it's sort of these intimate moments between people, um, portrait sort of style. And so you've got to make tough decisions. Now, you can enter these in different categories. So there might be like a single image category. So you could enter multiple images. But here's the thing. If you enter images, even your own, two images you can't decide on that are similar, it makes them both weaker.
Hmm.
Just pick one. Really pick one, because if nobody else has a similar image to that, it's going to pop out. If you show those two images, it just makes the judges think A, somebody else is shooting this story, or B, if it's you, you don't know how to edit. You can't decide.
Right. Right.
They should be different visually. They can, it just weakens everything if they're too similar.
Now, when you're going through the edit, obviously there are things like crowd shots. When we were looking at the thumbnail and there were crowd shots, and those just look very distinct. Obviously, when there's a lot of people in the shot, how aware are you of things like focal length when you're looking through an edit? So, for example, the second image here of this young person is a pretty wide focal length compared to the last image on the first row of the child. Is that something that you're kind of thinking, oh my gosh, I have too many wide angle shots. I need a more, telephoto shots, or is it just kind of this tells a story or it doesn't tell a story?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, you need a variety of focal lengths. You need the wide, you need the medium, and the perhaps you need a longer shot.
Hmm.
And also variety of perspectives. For me, what I don't like about all of these images is that for the most part, they're all kind of at the same, I'm sort of eye to eye with
Hmm.
all of them. And it's sort of like these eyes looking into the camera. And so I think that you need to have a variety of, and details and portraits and landscape and what I mean, look at all these different ways of telling the story. They can be, you can have a conceptual image in there that's sort of maybe a macro shot or a detail of something, but don't make it all about that. I mean,
Hmm.
just it's all about diversity within a story. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And how do you get around there's with photography, which is so very literal in the way that we capture a scene versus something like a
Hmm.
painting. There are obviously going to be a finite number of angles that we can shoot from, etc. And so I guess you're inevitably always going to run into some sort of visual cliche, for lack of a better word. And so we see here, the woman peering through the fence, the woman peering through the hole in the wall. Like when you hit these types of images that are kind of like visual cliches, how do you determine whether it's a good image or a bad image?
That's a tough question. And I mean, so also it's about that image might be good for a book cover,
Hmm.
because they need something really simple and cliche to a certain extent. Um, but it might not be the one for a photo contest. You
Right.
want to have a different aesthetic, and so again, it's really sort of and then figuring out how does it work with the other images in your story. Um, because simplicity is okay sometimes. I mean, it doesn't have to be that they are all so artistic that you don't understand what the whole story is about. I think a nice blend of, something a little less literal and kind of moody and you're not really sure what's going on is nice. But then when the whole essay is that and you don't know what it's about, that doesn't work either. But
Right.
that's a case, then you could take an image that's more sort of literal and simple and cliche, perhaps, and and it could work. It's just, Alan, I guess we'd have to like look at a case study
Yeah.
and really analyze. But if you do feel like you've got a cliche, just throw it out. I mean, if you have stronger work, um, but that I know it's again that's tricky when you're editing your own work.
Well, I've personally taken a lot
S-
of photos through holes in the wall, but mine never look nearly as good as yours. I mean, these are great photos.
No, well, I mean, I don't know, but the reason this slide is here, it's like if you're going to choose, you cannot put two images like this
Yeah.
in a story. You just can't. And that's what I think the greatest sort of that is a big mistake I see people doing. They're just too attached to their work and they can't look at how the images are working together.
Hmm.
So that's all the only reason I wanted to show this slide is to give an example of that. Um, and yeah, let's go to the next slides and talk about the whole manipulation
Yeah.
question. Calibrate your screens because what might look really nice at home gets so different contests show work in different ways. Nikon is amazing and they actually print out all 120,000 or however many images there were this year. They literally print everything out and put them on tables. So we go around and look at these images.
Wow.
So if you have not calibrated your screen and they print it out, it very often looked terrible. Like people were oversaturating or it might be too dark, but um, that's sort of something you need to do. Um, but also, you don't need to add more to the image and try to, I mean, this is that whole question you brought up so elegantly after World Press Photos. That Photoshop question. Just, you know what? If the image is moving, it's going to move us. We don't need, this, you know, bright colors and or muted colors now is the
Hmm.
trend.
Hmm.
Just stick to the content.
And I should point out for everyone who's watching at home or from their office, because we're going over the internet, these images might look exactly the same to you, but they're in fact very different on my monitor. One of them
Yes.
is much more saturated than the other.
So yeah, that's it. I mean, and I think a lot of young photographers are sort of, um, all these amazing tools are at our hands, and it's fun to get in Photoshop and start manipulating things. But it can really, yeah, it can actually really hurt you, and in some cases, I think it can even be unethical.
Right.
Um, so
You mentioned a couple times, having an attachment to a photo or a few photos, and I find the same thing too when I'm traveling to somewhere new and I take a photo and it's associated with an experience and a memory. It can sort of bias my impression of how good that photo is. I'm wondering how you kind of get over that. Is that when you pull in kind of a third party to help you edit, or do you just have to come back to that image a couple times and say, okay, clear head, open eyes, and I'm looking at the image without any bias?
yes, I mean, excellent question, and really tough. I mean, first of all, I'm sure many of us operate in a vacuum and we
Yeah.
don't really have tons of people. We're also, it's hard to go find somebody to look through your images. So the very first thing is I think people, it's that whole honesty question. Like, is this really good? Did you really work hard enough? Should you spend another year to work on your story before you start entering contests? Because, by the way, if you enter prematurely, it can actually hurt your career in some ways. Um, I think that seeing bad work, and maybe if sometimes judges know who, I mean, it usually is anonymous, but all I'm saying, it's just a waste of energy, frankly. But it also can be, it can just hurt your career. Show your best work when you're ready. And back to your question, you have to be brutally honest, and I think take time away from it and come back to it, and really ask yourself, did you do the best you can? Can you go back and reshoot it?
I always feel, the place where I see this most the connection between emotional attachment and quality of image is actually on Facebook when people post their wedding photos, because they're always selecting, the one iconic photo that they think is iconic from the wedding, and you'll be like, there's a tree coming out of your head.
Hmm.
And I think that's a perfect example where they're sort of really remembering this experience of kissing their spouse, and that's why they love this photo even if it's not a great photo. So I guess similarly for photographers, feeling like, oh, this was the one when it really isn't the one because they're not objective enough about the situation.
Right, and I think a lot of people just sort of at the end of the year see these contests and they go through all their work and sort of, you know, piece together stuff. And in their heart, they really know it might not be great.
Hmm.
And it's like, why go through all of that? Like, really, you should be spending that time you're spending editing for this photo contest going out and shooting. You know, like take that time and instead of researching all these I see so many people that spend so much time on the internet, so much time focusing on the wrong things. And your pictures will win when they're ready to.
Right.
And and also um this process is really a great way again to just kind of um reveal to yourself where you are. And then again, we're talking about different skill sets. I mean, I'm not talking, I'm sure like there's Flickr contests and contests for amateurs. If you're an amateur, that's great to want to know where you are and how you compare to everybody else. I mean, go ahead and enter contests, but don't obsess about it and make that your whole, you know, reason for shooting.
Right.
I think your reason for shooting needs to be, uh, yeah, you've got to do this for, you know, well, I mean, we all have different reasons, and it can be for the love of photography. That's great, but it's, you know, to win contest, it should be something a little deeper than that.
So we had seen a few slides back here, 10 images here that you said kind of visually were similar in your opinion. And
Hmm.
you ended up, I guess, choosing this one of the women surrounded by these other
Yes.
ladies. Why was this the one for you?
Well, first of all, the story behind it was so powerful, and again, it was so story is important. The story can't just be pretty, and um, we are looking for meaning, even if it's even if it is purely a category about the arts, it should have a deeper meaning too,
Hmm.
always. So we're looking on multiple levels. We're looking not just at the aesthetics. There's got to be a story. Every great, the heart of every great um, photographer is that they're a great storyteller. I think, and that's why I chose that image. The story was so compelling. I also think aesthetically, it worked. I felt intimate. I felt like you were with this woman and you felt her grief. So that was, it was a important piece of the Kashmir story, and it was about the people. So that's, not the conflict, not the soldiers, not that. It was really about the people caught in the middle of it.
And so in telling the story, how important are captions to you as a photographer and then as a judge?
Oh, oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Excellent point. So, so let me explain how some of these contests work. I mean, World Press Photo, for example, there's a first round, and they literally put us in a room that's probably like 45 degrees Fahrenheit. It is so cold. We're all sitting there with blankets, and the lights dim, and up comes the screen, and probably we start at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we look at images for hours straight, and they flash on the screen for maybe some of them at the most a couple seconds, and they're gone forever. And you have to decide immediately, in or out. Is
That's
that
crazy.
image going to stay? And so, the the fact is, oh, Alan, I'm sorry, I'm tired. What was your original question?
In regards to the caption.
Okay, so we don't see the captions then. We're just simply responding to how that image makes us feel. And then, if it makes it through that round, um, then it goes to a second round, and then captions can be brought in. And in many contests, captions are critical. I want to know what the story is about. We
Hmm.
don't generally read them. I mean, first of all, the images have to be strong. And then when it's sort of at the top tier and you're competing with other stories, that's when your story counts, and your captions are important. So I'm just thinking about also being honest in your captions. I can't tell you how many stories I've come across, and um, they've distorted they were trying to illustrate something about a story, and they might sort of insinuate something's happening in a picture, which might not be true.
Right, right.
And so, again, that whole ethical question is really important.
And obviously things like grammar and spelling must
Sh-
subconsciously come into play at some point as
I,
well.
I guess they do very often. Well, it's tricky because, it is a very international
Right.
pool of photographers now. So you might have somebody that's speaking English as a second language, and we are willing to overlook that if your English is not perfect.
Right.
But it does help to have a concise, understandable, with good grammar and all of
Yeah.
that. But I will look over English as a second language. So, yeah.
So do your research here. We have a couple bullet points here. Uh, Talk to us about kind of the level and exposure here, local, national versus international. World Press Photo, obviously an international competition with many entrants, and as you said, 150,000 images that you had to parse through.
hmm Yeah, it might have been a little bit less, but hey, anything after 100,000 is
Yeah.
the same. Um, so local, national, or international. I mean, you might, if it's a local photo contest, that might be great to help you with your career in your community. So I think that they can be completely valid and important, and help you with your mission, whatever it may be. So also, but the aesthetics are going to be different. I mean, what is important to your local community is going to be very different to an international panel of judges.
Hmm.
So think about who your audience is when you're editing, um, and look at, for example, in a national contest, like I definitely have noticed in, NPPA, for example, that there can sometimes be, it's changing now. I think we're becoming very globalized quickly, but there was for a while a very American aesthetic and perspective, and the stories that were important to them might not be as important to somebody from China.
Hmm.
And so, or vice versa, if you're a Chinese photographer entering that contest, we may have no idea what that story was about if it was sort of local story. So kind of understand who your audience is for that contest, and is it really fitting? Um, so yeah,
The
the other thing about,
Yeah, go ahead.
oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, go ahead.
The you talked about this process with World Press Photo, where in the first round you're looking at photos for a few seconds at the most, a half second on the low side. In other contests, judges are together in the room. In other different contests, they're not together in a room. They're talking about a photo. They're not talking about a photo. They have scorecards.
Yeah.
How much do you think the photographer should know about the actual judging process before entering the contest? Does it matter that I'm entering World Press Photo and I know you're going to look at my photo for a second?
Well, I guess it just, I don't think you need to like really research and make this a part of your equation as you're coming up with your entry, but it should just make you feel better if you don't win. Because let
That's a
me
good
tell
point.
you, contests are deeply, deeply flawed, even
Yeah,
the best ones.
yeah,
And I mean, one thing I noticed, for example, in World Press Photo is that very often quiet images can get lost.
right.
And a story that happened a couple of times where this very poetic, beautiful story would flash by, and um, right before that was this very emotional, sort of dramatic story. Then there's this very quiet, sort of more featurey story, and then the next story might be another dramatic story, and so I've very often had to like stop and go back and pull things out of the cracks, but things do fall through the cracks. Absolutely. It just happens. And then it's very difficult to compare two stories on a screen
Yeah, yeah.
that might be not, in the tray. One will come first at the end, at the beginning of the slideshow, and one will come at the end of the slideshow. Very tricky to compare in your mind those images. So it's not this perfect process, and just let that be consolation. The thing is, if it's a really good essay, though, even if you don't win, the judges will remember you.
Hmm.
And that is the best part about this. You do not have to win these contests for them to impact your career.
It's kind of like American
Um,
Idol coming in like fourth place, and you're like, no, you
there
really
you
have a
go.
career.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I think just, pre try to be a little bit zen about these contests and just know that um it's just not simple. And then another process I've done where they lay all the pictures out on a table and you're only allowed to choose one, each
Oh,
judge.
wow.
And so what happens is there might be 50 great images on that table, but you're only allowed to choose
Yeah.
one. And so the next table might be full of 50 weak images, and a weaker image will get selected because that's how the process is.
Right.
So they're just not perfect. And then finally, the most important thing is that no judges ever, ever agree. And what ends up winning very often is a compromise.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
it may not be the best image in my mind or anybody's mind, but it's one we all can agree is solid.
Interesting.
Does that make,
Yeah,
yeah,
no, totally.
it
One of the
so
most interesting pieces of advice that I've gotten from another photographer was also make sure that the image looks good as a thumbnail. Because in a lot of cases, in first round of judging, again, people are looking at a light box in maybe Lightroom or online with PhotoShelter or something like that. And oftentimes they're responding to what it looks like when it's a tiny thumbnail, unfortunately.
yeah, that is probably very true. But I think that if you start trying to edit to please the
Yeah,
judges or, make it look good on a as a thumbnail, mm,
kind of losing yourself.
yeah, it's just it's just, maybe it'll work, but I tend to think that it's sort of a body of work that at the end, I mean, those for people that are entering photo stories
Hmm.
and the people that enter still images, I mean, like one image, tend to also enter photo essays as well.
So on
So,
this slide, what's the right contest for me? On the second bullet, you kind of say, when in doubt, wait. I guess this goes back to
yeah,
the you can ruin your chances if you enter too early comment that you made earlier.
I think so. I think it's again like why are you paying the contest fees or why are you wasting your precious time when you could be shooting entering this if you know in your heart that it's just not there and you're trying to stitch together stuff that isn't really holding up in your mind. If
Hmm.
you have doubts, chances are, I mean, there's going to be far better work. And why don't you just keep working on whatever you're working on
Hmm.
until you're ready? And on the other hand, I think the whole process is very good to go through if you have the time, because you do sort of see see how you compare
Yeah.
and sort of it just again that whole reflection it gives you an idea a chance to reflect on your own work but I do hear a lot of people uh, who are really negative about photo contest and that's easy. I'm not going to debate with them. It's easy to do. But I do see real value, and I also want to encourage the people that don't enter the contest are sometimes the people that absolutely should be entering the contest because I find it really ironic, sort of the a lot of people that have big egos and that's okay we all have egos
Yeah.
but like they're entering all their work thinking it's so wonderful and then the person who might have worked for years on a project and thinks that thinks that they're not ready for it. I
Yeah.
mean, I know I'm sort of saying exactly opposite from what I just said, but I guess those quiet photographers that might be too shy to enter and think they're never ready,
Right.
maybe you ought to get some friends to look at your work and not your mother, but really qualified people who can, tell you how good your work is and tell you if it's time to enter.
You said that you don't enter contests much anymore. I do see a lot of, old pros who've been entering contests and winning contests for years and years and years. At a certain point, the contest does really function as marketing, though, right? Isn't there sort of kind of a relevancy factor that, oh, this guy won 20 years ago and he's still winning. He must be getting his name out in front of
Absolutely.
photo editors.
Yeah, no, and I do see a value, and sometimes I sort of think, maybe I should start entering the contest because photographers are also the most insecure. We're all insecure,
Right.
and it's like, I'm only as good as my last picture. But you know what? It's actually, I think, okay to take a few years off, concentrate on your work, get your priorities and straight, and then, yeah, you're right. It is great marketing, no doubt about that. But yeah, I guess everybody has very different motivations and needs, and it is great to keep entering and winning after 20 years.
Right.
They're amazing people, and frankly, not just marketing, not to be so cynical about it. It is, as I said in the beginning of this, is that these stories that you really care about and you want the world to see, there is no better way. For example, World Press Photos exhibit travels around the world and gets seen by the people who need to see this, not just the
Right.
editors.
Yeah.
It gets seen by normal people who we want to influence and get them to care about the world. So being passionate and getting your pictures out in contests is great. And that's what I mean about the quiet photographer. Enter because the world needs to see your work. Why are you doing this? If it's just sitting on your computer and nobody ever sees it, what's the point? You need to, if you're really engaged in an issue that you want to create awareness about,
Hmm.
contests are a great way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So,
We only have a few minutes left, but I just wanted to get a little bit more color on the whole manipulation thing. And looking at, for example, the World Press winners from this year and kind of going back to all of the World Press winners since the inception of the contest, the aesthetic has undoubtedly shifted. And I think that's probably just, just visually things change. So, as much as you are sort of personally against the hypersaturation or the glossy look, is that just what we're dealing with nowadays, and is that sort of inevitable, and is it just kind of a phase that we're going through as visual artists?
Alan, this is another photo shelter conversation.
Yeah.
It'll take much more than 2 minutes,
Exactly.
but oh my goodness. But I think that it is a very important debate. Absolutely. And I actually think contests should really make guidelines and rules to guide people about their contest. Is it okay for this contest or is it not? Because photographers don't know. We're in this gray area. And when they don't know, they're stretching the limits. And so we need more guidance from the actual competitions, I think.
And do the
Um,
judges get any guidance when you walk in the room for that first time? Are they saying, "Well, there was some flack over the winner last year, so," or are they just saying, "Hey, you're from Russia, you're from America, tell us what photo you like"?
yeah, well, it's always every contest is different about that. Some are very, we have deep conversations about it. Others, we get into huge arguments because, there might be a judge who's got a very conceptual, artistic background that totally thinks it's fine, and they have no photojournalism or documentary photography background.
Hmm.
So they don't really see the ethical issue with it in a way that, um, I've been on judge, panels with a lot of judges that have photojournalist backgrounds, and it's pretty, I mean, the best photographers I know out there, all for example, all the National Geographic photographers, we have very clear guidelines. And, when we submit our stories, you do no manipulation. You give them raw
Right,
images,
right.
period. And we go into these contests with that same belief system. And so it's tricky, Alan. There's no one answer for that. But I guess my quick short answer is, if it is sort of a conceptual, artistic contest, there's going to be more leeway. But the genie is definitely out of the bottle. We have not had enough conversations about this, and it's going to get more complicated
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah. I can't believe how quickly the hour goes by. I wish we had like 3 or 4 more hours kind of talk about this stuff. But
Yeah.
Amy, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to join us to talk about the contest.
Oh, thank you. No, I hope it's helpful to people, but thank you so much. And yeah, go to the next webinar. Copyright is another big one.
Yeah, speaking of which, we have actually a fabulous webinar coming up on August 6th. So, Carolyn Wright, who you might know from photoattorney.com, will be joining us to talk not just the mechanics of registering your copyright, but actually if you've been infringed, what steps should you take to go all the way to having a lawsuit against the person who infringed against you. I want to thank Amy once again, and I want to thank you guys for joining us on the webinar today. We have recorded this, and so it'll be up on the blog tomorrow. So in case you missed anything or want to hear Amy's mellifluous voice again, she's got a great radio voice. You can keep listening to her. That's what I'll be doing.
You're
But
a sweetheart. Thanks, Alan.
thank you, Amy. We'll talk to you
All right,
soon.
take care.
Bye
All
bye.
right, great. Bye-bye.